Welcome back. And during the second segment of our show, Senator Biden will talk about the moral values that he learned around his grandfather Finnegan's kitchen table. And more importantly, he'll talk to us about the lessons that he believes this nation should have learned from 9/11 and the way the Bush administration has handled it. If you haven't read Senator Joe Biden's book, Promises to Keep, and you live in the coal country, you need to get a copy of it. It's a tremendous book, and I'm thrilled that Senator Biden came to the law offices of O'Malley and Langan and spent some time with us here on You Be the Judge, sharing his views about that book. Senator, one of the reasons you're here is to sign some books, and I'm sure there can be a lot of Scrantonians coming up and getting their signature on this. Was it as much fun as it seems, having just read a little bit of it, to recount your days in Scranton?
Well, you know, I started off writing about foreign policy. I was asked by the publishers would I write about foreign policy. Next thing I knew, I'm sitting here trying to figure out how I got back to Scranton. And I started talking about why I believe what I believe. I realized it came from my grandfather's kitchen table. And I talk about here, and I start off the book, which surprised me when I look back on it. It's the first principle of politics, the foundational principle I learned in the 1950s in my grandfather's kitchen, was when I was about 12 or 13 years old. My parents had recently moved. Every Sunday we'd come back to my grandfather's kitchen table. And I go on, I talk about, and then I talk about how the nuns up here, how they treated me at St. Paul's, and about how people gave me confidence. I used to stutter a lot, and how they told me, no, I can do anything. And I end here, and I talk about what my grandfather told me. I will not forget that we were sitting at his kitchen table. There was an argument about whether or not there was a local county chairman who was always getting in kind of trouble. And my grandfather, the paper out there, my grandfather was a man of rectitude. He was an upstanding guy, Ambrose Finnegan, and went to Santa Clara. And anyway, to make a long story short, he turned to me and he said, "Joey, you're wondering why I like so-and-so so much." And I kind of looked, and he said, you like Mr. Scranton, don't you? And I said, well, Pop, I was about 14 years old. Scranton was just starting. He said, let me tell you the difference. He said, you know, when so-and-so, the county chairman, he tells you he's going to do something, he's do it. He said, he's going to say, I'm going to cut your heart out, and I'm coming at you. If you're going to say, I'm going to help you, I'll help you. And he told this story about how, you know, that very wealthy people sometimes will tell you something, and they'll do it if it's at their country club or in their home. But when it gets to politics, they think it's kind of beneath them. That is, politics, I remember him saying, politics is, they think is only for us Irish and Jews and Italians and Poles and Slovaks. And he said it's kind of beneath them, so anything goes. He said, remember, your word is your word, and the only thing you have in politics is your word. And I found myself, when I talked about going back and taking on Milosevic, when I sat at a table this size, calling him a war criminal to his face, when I found myself sitting down with the president, telling him what a mistake I thought Iraq was, I always think of Scranton and my grandfather saying, your word, your word, your word.
I saw you last night on Hardball, talking about a visit you had with the President, Secretary of State, the Vice President. Share that with us.
Well, you know, again, it's about what my grandpa and my father would say. I feel when I go down, I've been there for 7 presidents, and I think you have an obligation when you sit down with the president, you ask you a question, give him an honest answer. You may be wrong, but you have an obligation to tell him what you believe rather than just be intimidated by the officer, say what he wants to hear. And he was asking me why I wanted to have Rumsfeld fired. I was the first person called for Rumsfeld's withdrawal. And it was right after Abu Ghraib scandal, and no one was being held accountable. And I said that this is, again, this is a Scranton thing when you think about it, at least my neighborhood. And it was that, you know, what you do is you stand up and you take a hit. You make a mistake, you stand up, you take a hit, say, I'm responsible, I'll resign. And I couldn't understand why Rumsfeld wouldn't take responsibility. And so the press asked me, they said, what would you do if you're president? I said, I'd fire him. I'd ask for his resignation. And so the president said, Joe, why do you keep picking on Rummy? And the vice president was sitting there, Vice President Cheney, and the other armchair in front of the fireplace. And I said, in full disclosure, Mr. President, I turned to Dick Cheney, who I've known for 30-some years. I said, Mr. Vice President, were you not a constitutional officer? I'd call for your resignation, too. The president said, why would you say that? And I said, name me one piece of advice they've given you on Iraq that's turned out to be right. And there was silence, and Cheney knew I wasn't personal. I was just making the point. You have to take responsibility. And that's the one thing I learned at St. Paul's. The one thing I learned as a kindergartner, one thing I learned at my grandfather's knee. You're responsible. You're responsible for your actions. And I think the thing that is the most disturbing about what's happened the last 6 years, think about it. No one's been held responsible for any mistakes. You find some private, you find some sergeant, you court-martial them for Abu Ghraib. No one's responsible for the mistakes we made in Iraq. No one's responsible for the mistakes that are being made in terms of eavesdropping on Americans, etc. And that's the part that, again, the foundation principle I learned right here in this town is part of your ethic.
Your son,
straight up.
Your son, Bo.
Yeah, great
Attorney
guy.
General.
Great guy.
State of Delaware.
State of Delaware.
Chief Law Enforcement Officer
Yeah.
in Delaware.
Yeah, he's quite a guy.
What about our Chief Law Enforcement Officer in the United States, our
Well,
Attorney General?
Look, the attorney, I don't have anything personal against Alberto Gonzales. He's probably a nice guy, but I voted against him in the beginning because here's a guy who didn't know how to say no to the president. The Attorney General is the people's lawyer. He's not the president's lawyer, he's the people's lawyer. And when the President of the United States wanted to buy onto the notion that redefining what constituted torture under international law, they came up with this tortured Orwellian definition that it's not torture under the Geneva Conventions unless there's organ failure or there is death. And the Attorney General of the United States was then Chief Legal Counsel. He said, that's right. I don't know how you can, again, who's responsible? No one's responsible for the firing of these U.S. attorneys. No one's responsible for these outrageous decisions being made about civil liberties. I got off the airplane at Avoca to come down to your office. There were kids there from the 10th Mountain Division. They've been in Afghanistan. They're heading down to train in Louisiana now. Some of those kids may not come back. It seems to me that this administration and Gonzales forgets that the reason we signed onto those international treaties about torture was to protect our children. My son, who's a captain in the United States, United States Army National Guard, whose unit's been given notice they're going next year. This isn't about us being good guys. It's about us wanting to protect our own. It's about the decency of the country. And I just don't, our own intelligence agencies, all 13 intelligence agencies, I know you know this, they publish a thing called a National Intelligence Estimate. That is the consensus view of the United States intelligence community. You read what they published last month. They said that the policies of this administration, these guys work for the president, have made us less safe. That Al-Qaeda has reconstituted itself. That we are in a position where we have produced more terrorists than we have destroyed or dissuaded. The one thing that nobody seems to understand in this administration, particularly Gonzales, is that when the Berlin Wall came down, we became the center stage nation, and our ideals and our ideas were put front and center for the whole world. And that's the power of America. It's not merely our military force, it's our ideals and our ideas. When Lech Walesa came to see me after he got elected president, and the Foreign Relations Committee, we have a room about the size of your whole office here with a big you've been there. It's the Senate Foreign Relations Executive Room. It looks like the Cabinet Room. And I happen to chair that committee, and we invite heads of state to come to meet with the members of that committee on a regular basis. Lech Walesa walked over to me, passed everybody, put his hands on my shoulders and said, Senator Biden, thank you, thank you. And I said, no, Mr. President. I said, thank you, thanks solidarity. You know what his answer was? He said, no. He said, Radio Free Europe and the Holy Father, well, they brought the wall down. It's our ideas and our ideals, and Gonzales does not adhere to those. As the Chief Law Enforcement Officer of America, he should not have that job.
I heard you at the Democratic dinner back just before the 2004 election here in Lackawanna County talk about the opportunities squandered by this administration post 9/11. Why don't you share them with our viewers?
I actually like George Bush. I really mean it. I'm not being solicitous. he's a decent guy. He's a guy that, you'd go have a drink with. When I was here, it used to be Calpin's. Now I don't know what it is up on across from the county prison. But you'd sit down and you enjoy his company. So he's not a bad guy. And he's not going to be judged harshly for the mistakes he's made. Had I been president on 9/11, I would have made mistakes, I'm sure. But he'll be judged very harshly for the opportunities he has squandered. Imagine, I see you have a picture of John Kennedy over there. Imagine that John Kennedy had been president on 9/13, 2 days later. I imagine you would have heard President Kennedy say something like, "My fellow Americans, we've been dealt a tragic blow. 3,000 of our citizens have been murdered, and we're on the balls of our heels economically. But like every generation before us, we'll overcome this." And I have two announcements to make today. The first announcement is that I've called a meeting of the world's major powers to meet in Brussels in Europe to jointly plan the demise of the rise of Islamic fundamentalism. And secondly, I'm sending an energy bill to the United States Congress that will free us from the iron grip of the oil oligarchs. But it will be difficult. It will take sacrifice. And I'm not asking you. I tell you, I expect your support. Who in America would have said no? Who would have said no?
That's right.
What did this president say? God love him, as my mother would say. He said, fly and go to the mall. That's literally what he said. They're not bad things. Keep the economy going, keep the airlines up, get the economy moving. But the idea that these guys have an instinct for the capillary, as they used to say, instead of the jugular. I mean, the whole notion of just not having enough confidence in the American people. American people have more grit, they have more staying power, they have more determination, they have more courage. Neither party gives them credit for. And every time I say that, the national press says to me, what makes you so sure of that? And I have the same answer. The neighborhood I came from. Literally, the neighborhood I came from. I know, because I know the people in the neighborhood I came from.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you.
And to the people from the neighborhood he came from, the people all over northeastern Pennsylvania, go to joebiden.com. By all means, let's help elect the most qualified man in America to be president of this great nation. Thank you, Senator.
I love your prejudiced view of me. Thank you.
I came away from my interview with Senator Biden with a belief that the 2008 presidential election is the most important presidential election perhaps this nation has ever faced. With problems in Iraq, Syria, North Korea, Iran, Venezuela, we need a president that understands the global policies that will guide our country. I hope you'll get involved this year in the presidential election with whatever candidate you choose. You can learn more about Senator Biden by going to joebiden.com. By all means, read his book. This is an extremely important election. And today, our question for you to be the judge is simply this. Do you think having a president from this region, with ties to this region, will be good for our area? Go to youbethejudgepa.com, vote A yes, B no, and you be the judge.